The city of Erindor was alive with light. On the surface of Earth, humanity's homeworld, it rose higher than any city before it, an endless sprawl of steel, glass and glowing neon veins that climbed into the clouds. Skyscrapers gleamed like crystal towers, their spires lost in the night fog. Above, silver skyways carried sleek cars humming silently across the stars. Drones flitted in the air like fireflies, delivering goods, scanning streets or recording the lives of those who thought themselves important. To the common eye, it was paradise. To those who lived below the shining towers, in the shadows where neon did not reach, it was a prison made of wealth, and tonight, the two halves of this world would collide. Alexander Vaynar stood in front of the panoramic glass window of his penthouse. From here, the city looked like a dream. Endless lights scattered across the horizon. His reflection stared back at him. A tall man in his 40s, dark hair brushed back neatly, eyes calm, almost unreadable. He wore a black suit tailored to perfection, with only a single platinum pin on his collar, a subtle mark of wealth far greater than the neon lights below. He was a man who could walk into any dinner, any boardroom, any orbital station, and be given a seat of power. He was not loud. He was not flamboyant. He was deliberate, every move calculated, every word chosen with care. But tonight he had made a decision that even those closest to him did not understand. Behind him, Mira shifted nervously. She was not used to clothing like this, an elegant dress of deep sapphire blue chosen by Alexander himself. It was simple compared to the gowns of the elite, yet it fit her perfectly. She tugged at the fabric as though it didn't belong to her, her eyes darting to the floor. "I shouldn't be going," she whispered. Alexander turned slightly, his voice calm but carrying a firmness that silenced her worry. "You're coming. But I'm just your housekeeper. What will people say?" "They'll say what they always say." He picked up a small glass from the table, swirling the liquid inside without drinking it. "But tonight they will say it about you." She frowned, confused, but he gave no further explanation. Instead, he offered his arm, and though hesitant, Mira took it. The Interstellar Trade Guild's banquet was held in the High Crown Tower, a building that stretched so high it pierced the clouds. Its halls were lined with rare crystal, its doors guarded by armored sentinels, whose weapons shimmered with blue plasma. To enter was to walk into the heart of power itself. When Alexander and Mira stepped into the grand hall, silence fell like a blade cutting through laughter. Dozens of figures, dressed in robes woven with gold threads and suits embedded with nanogems, turned to stare. Floating servers carried trays of glimmering drinks. Holographic orchestras played soft music in the air. And yet, every sound seemed to vanish the moment eyes locked on the young woman at Alexander's side. A whisper traveled across the room like electricity. "Who is she?" "She's no one. His housekeeper." A low laugh, sharp and cruel. "Has Vaynar lost his mind?" Mira felt the weight of every gaze pressing against her skin. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. She wanted to vanish, to step back through the doors and return to the quiet shadows of her life. But Alexander did not slow. His stride was steady, his gaze unwavering. He moved through the sea of nobles as if their whispers meant nothing, as if he carried a secret they could never understand. At the far end of the hall, a man in a white uniform of polished steel and crimson threads raised his glass. His voice boomed, silencing all others. "Alexander Vaynar," he greeted, lips curling into a thin smile. "You honor us with your presence, and your choice of company." The man was Commander Halric, the guild's host for the night, a figure both feared and admired. His eyes scanned Mira, and though his smile remained, there was a glint of mockery behind it. "Tell me," Halric continued, "is this how things are done now in the lower districts? Bringing one's help to dine among kings and queens?" Laughter rippled through the hall. Some guests covered their mouths politely. Others laughed openly, boldly. Mira felt her chest tighten. Heat rose to her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but Alexander's hand tightened slightly on hers. A silent signal. Not yet. Instead, he simply inclined his head to the commander, calm and composed. "Tonight, Commander," Alexander said, his voice like smooth steel, "we will see who truly belongs among kings." The laughter faltered. A few brows furrowed. Mira's eyes widened, unsure of what game Alexander was playing. Halric studied him for a long moment, then chuckled and raised his glass again. "Very well. Let us see." The evening continued, but the whispers never stopped. Mira sat beside Alexander at the long table of silver and crystal, surrounded by the most powerful figures in the guild. Their voices were filled with hidden daggers. Does she even know how to use the proper utensils? Perhaps she's here to scrub the floors. Imagine the scandal if word spreads. Each remark stabbed at her, but what unsettled her most was Alexander's silence. He did not defend her. He did not comfort her. He simply sat, eyes calm, watching the room as though every insult, every glance was part of a puzzle only he could see. Mira's hands curled into fists in her lap. She thought of leaving, of standing up and running from the suffocating hall. But something inside her whispered to stay. Something about the way Alexander carried himself, unshaken, unafraid, made her wonder if he knew more than anyone else here. Why had he brought her? Why tonight? Why here in front of the most powerful people in the galaxy? The hall sparkled with gold, the chandeliers shimmering like captured stars. Yet for Mira, the world felt heavy, dangerous. She could not shake the feeling that this night would change everything. And as the first toast was raised, the tension in the air promised one thing. Something was coming, something none of them expected. The grand hall glittered with false warmth. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over the tables, but beneath that glow lurked sharp eyes and sharper tongues. Mira sat stiffly, trying to keep her composure, but she could feel the weight of every stare. She didn't belong here. Everyone knew it, and they wanted her to feel it. The first course arrived, floating trays delivered by servant drones, each plate set down with mechanical precision. Delicate slices of shimmering blue fish, imported from the seas of Europa, rested on crystal dishes. Mira had never seen food like this before. She hesitated, glancing at Alexander. He ate slowly, calmly, as though none of this mattered. But across the table, a group of young heirs noticed her hesitation. They were the children of guild leaders, men and women raised in wealth so deep they couldn't imagine life without it. One of them leaned forward, his lips curled in a sly grin. "Tell us," he said loudly, making sure the room could hear. "What do they feed you in the lower districts? Nutrient paste? Leftover scraps?" Laughter erupted. Mira's cheeks burned, but she kept her eyes down. Alexander didn't move. He simply lifted his glass and took a sip of wine, as though waiting. Another heir, a woman draped in silver, tilted her head mockingly. "Oh, don't be cruel. Perhaps she knows more than we think." She turned her gaze directly on Mira. "Tell us, housekeeper, what do you think of the guild's latest trade expansion? Do you believe it will help the colonies thrive, or doom them to more chaos?" It was a question designed to corner her. The guild's trade expansion was the topic of the night. Complex, filled with politics, numbers, and debates that only the most educated could hope to navigate. Whispers spread like wildfire. She won't answer. She can't possibly know. She'll embarrass herself. Mira froze. She felt trapped. The hall seemed to close in, the eyes of 100 powerful figures pressing against her skin. She wanted to stay silent, but Alexander's calm presence beside her anchored her. He hadn't told her to speak. He hadn't told her to stay quiet. He had only brought her here into the lion's den and sat watching. So she took a breath. "I think," she began softly, her voice trembling at first, "the expansion will help no one, if it is led only by people who never set foot on the colonies themselves." The laughter died instantly. Every head turned toward her. Mira swallowed hard, but she forced herself to continue. "You trade routes. You build stations. You dictate rules. But do you ask the miners what they need? The farmers? The mechanics? You expand on maps, but not in hearts. And in the end, those you ignore will be the ones who decide whether your routes survive." Her words hung in the air, sharp and unshakable. The heirs blinked, stunned. Their smirks vanished. Some of the older guests shifted in their seats, uncomfortable. A few even looked impressed, though they hid it quickly. The silver-draped woman forced a laugh. "How charming. A speech on empathy from a servant." But her voice was tight, strained. She hadn't expected Mira to answer at all, let alone strike at the core of the guild's greatest flaw. Across the table, Commander Halric's gaze sharpened. He had been watching quietly, saying nothing as the heirs played their cruel games. Now his lips curled into something between amusement and curiosity. Alexander finally spoke, his voice smooth. "It seems," he said softly, "that wisdom can survive even without wealth." Mira turned to him, startled. It was the first time he had acknowledged her words directly. His calm expression remained unreadable, but there was something in his tone, a note of approval, faint but undeniable. The heirs said no more. They leaned back, their pride wounded, their game ruined. The great hall seemed to lean forward, as if the chandeliers themselves bent to listen. Commander Halric stood at the head of the table, his glass of golden wine catching the light like a shard of the sun. His gaze was sharp, fixed on Mira, daring her to answer. She could feel her heart hammering in her chest. Her palms dampened. This was no laughing heir, no spoiled noble. This was Halric, the commander, the man whose name carried through every station, every colony, every fleet. His decisions shaped the lives of billions. His word could open or close the gates of fortune, and now he was waiting for her. Alexander said nothing. He did not lean forward. He did not whisper encouragement. He only sat still, eyes calm, watching. He had led her into the fire, and now he would see if she burned. Mira swallowed. She could back down. She could smile politely, apologize, pretend she hadn't meant to speak at all. That would be safe. That would end the attention. But something in her chest resisted. She remembered the whispers, the cruel laughter, the way the heirs had mocked her as though she were nothing more than dirt beneath their boots. And she remembered Alexander's quiet words. They bleed when pressed, so she lifted her chin. "With respect, Commander," she said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled beneath the table. "Knowing the colonies is not the same as visiting them from orbit. You see trade numbers, you read reports, but you do not walk their streets. You do not see the hunger in their eyes." A hush swept the room like a cold wind. Halric's smile froze in place. The nobles stiffened, their expressions ranging from shock to delight. Some gasped audibly, others smirked behind jeweled hands. "She insulted him," someone whispered, loud enough to be heard. "By mistake," another replied, though their grin suggested they were pleased. This will end poorly. Mira's blood turned to ice. The words had tumbled from her mouth faster than she'd intended. She hadn't meant to insult him. She had only meant to answer. But in her honesty, she had struck at the commander's pride, the one thing no one dared to touch. Halric set down his glass with slow precision. The faint clink echoed through the silent hall like the toll of a bell. He did not raise his voice. He did not scowl. Instead, he leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "You believe I do not understand my own colonies." His tone was soft, almost amused, but the steel beneath it was unmistakable. Mira's mouth went dry. She opened it, but no words came. Her mind scrambled for a way out, but the silence stretched and every pair of eyes in the hall dug into her like knives. And then he chuckled. The sound was low, unexpected. He leaned back, folding his hands behind him. "Interesting," he said at last. "Very few have the courage to speak so directly. Especially one such as you." The words stung, but they carried no anger. Instead, there was something else in his eyes. Curiosity. The nobles shifted, whispering again. Some were disappointed. They had wanted to see Mira humiliated, crushed beneath the commander's boot. Others leaned forward, intrigued by her boldness. Alexander, for the first time in the evening, allowed the faintest trace of a smile to touch his lips. Halric's voice cut through the whispers. "Then let me test you, housekeeper. If you believe I know nothing, tell me this." He gestured toward the holographic display floating above the table, glowing faint blue. Trade routes, numbers, shipments flickered in the air. The colonies on the Helion belt are bleeding credits. Our reports say piracy. Our patrols say sabotage. But the council cannot agree. What do you say? The hall froze again. It was madness. Unthinkable that the commander of the guild would address a servant at all, much less demand her opinion in front of his peers. Mira's mind raced. She had no formal training, no schooling in interstellar trade, but she remembered conversations she had overheard when delivering Alexander's meals. She remembered snatches of broadcasts, stories from workers who had traveled through the belt. She remembered their voices, their frustration, their anger. She inhaled. "I say, you are looking in the wrong place." Halric's eyebrow lifted slightly. The room tensed. The Helian belt miners don't need pirates to make them desperate. They're paid less than the fuel they dig out. They've been warning about collapses, about shortages, about failing equipment for years. No one listened. So when cargo goes missing, maybe it isn't pirates. She paused, her voice tightening. Maybe it's survival. The hall erupted into noise, gasps, murmurs, shocked laughter. Some clapped mockingly. Others argued in hushed voices. Halric raised a hand and silence returned instantly. His face was unreadable, carved from stone. Finally, after a long moment, he gave a single nod. A bold answer, he said. Perhaps even true. Mira's breath escaped in relief, though her heart still pounded. She had expected anger, punishment, humiliation. Instead, she had been acknowledged. But not everyone was pleased. One of the nobles slammed his goblet onto the table. "This is absurd," he barked. "Are we to take lectures from servants now? This dinner is an insult to the guild." Others muttered in agreement, their voices rising. The tension thickened, filling the hall like smoke. Mira felt their hostility burning into her. Alexander finally moved. He set down his glass and rose slowly, his presence commanding without a single raised word. His calm voice spread across the table like a blade sliding free of its sheath. "You call it an insult," he said, "because you are afraid. Afraid that truth might come from somewhere beyond your marble halls. Afraid that wisdom does not bow to your titles." His gaze swept the hall, meeting eyes without flinching. "I brought her here to remind you. Power is not proof of worth. And tonight you have all been reminded." The hall fell into uneasy silence. Some looked ashamed. Some looked furious. Some stared at Mira as if seeing her for the first time. And Mira, she sat frozen, her mind spinning. She had not planned this. She had not wanted this. Yet somehow her words had shaken the room. Halric's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Perhaps," he murmured, "this dinner will be more entertaining than I thought." The music struck up again, but the air was changed. Mira had crossed a line she could never step back from, and deep inside she knew this night was far from over. The music swelled again, but no one heard it. The orchestra's holographic violins glimmered in the air, yet the notes faded into the heavy silence pressing over the hall. All eyes remained fixed on Commander Halric, and on the young woman who had dared to speak against him. Mira's hands rested stiffly in her lap. She could still feel her heart hammering from the words that had escaped her lips, words she hadn't fully meant as an insult, but everyone had taken them as one. The commander sat unmoving, his face carved from stone. He had not raised his voice. He had not slammed the table. He had not dismissed her like the nobles expected him to. Instead, he simply watched. That silence was worse than any outburst. The nobles shifted uneasily, whispering among themselves. "He'll make an example of her. He's waiting for the perfect moment." No one speaks to Halric like that and survives their reputation. Mira swallowed, her throat dry. She wanted to look down to hide, but she forced herself to keep her chin raised. She could not take back her words. To shrink now would only prove the nobles right, that she didn't belong here, that she was a foolish girl playing dress-up in a world far above her station. Still, she wondered, why does Alexander stay silent? Beside her, Alexander sipped his wine with calm indifference. His eyes locked on the commander as though the rest of the hall didn't exist. He gave Mira no sign, no reassurance, no defense. It was as if this entire storm was exactly what he had expected. At last, Commander Halric leaned back in his chair. He steepled his fingers, the light of the holographic trade routes flickering across his silver uniform. His eyes never left Mira. "You say I do not understand hunger," he said softly, his tone unreadable. "You say I command from afar, that I do not see the colonies as they are, that I lead with numbers, not with sight." He paused. The silence stretched until the air seemed to vibrate with tension. "Perhaps you are right." Gasps rippled through the room. The nobles turned in shock, whispering furiously. The commander agreed with her. Halric raised a hand and the whispers died instantly. His gaze sharpened, the glint of a predator in his eyes. "But if you are bold enough to make such claims," he continued, "then you should be bold enough to answer me this." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "If you were sitting where I sit, if the lives of millions weighed upon your shoulders, how would you act differently?" The hall froze. It was unthinkable. A guild commander asking a servant her opinion on leadership? It had to be a trap. Mira's breath caught in her throat. Her mind screamed at her to stay silent. One wrong answer, and she would humiliate herself beyond repair. Yet another voice whispered in her chest, the same voice that had carried her through the sneers and the cruel questions earlier in the evening. She lifted her chin and forced her voice to steady. I would listen. The room went utterly still. Listen to whom? Alric asked. To those you ignore, Mira said. The miners, the settlers, the ones who see the cracks before the walls fall, the ones who know when the crops are failing, when the engines are breaking, when the storms are coming. The ones who live in the places your ships only pass through, the nobles murmured angrily. A few laughed in disbelief, but Mira did not stop. Her voice grew stronger with each word. You sit in halls of crystal and look at charts. The echo of Commander Halric's toast lingered in the Golden Hall. To truth. Such words had never been spoken in that place, not by him, not in front of the guild's highest nobles, but it was not the toast itself that shook the guests. It was the fact that he had spoken it to her, a housekeeper from the lower districts. Whispers spread like sparks through dry leaves. Some voices carried disbelief, others irritation, and some, a very small number, carried curiosity. She dares to lecture us. And the commander humors her. Has he gone mad? No. He's testing her. Or testing us. Mira sat frozen, her glass trembling slightly in her hand. The clink of crystal against crystal still rang in her mind. The commander had not humiliated her. He had not dismissed her. Instead, he had placed her in the center of the hall like a flame in the dark, and now the fire was spreading. The nobles began to speak, not to her, but to each other. A merchant prince leaned across the table, his voice sharp. The girl is wrong. The colonies are loyal. Their complaints are exaggerated. Another noble shook his head. You blind yourself. My own caravans have reported losses. Perhaps she speaks more truth than you wish to admit. You trust a servant over reports written by guild officials? Reports can be bought. Hunger cannot. The debate rose quickly, louder, harsher, until the hall was filled with clashing voices. The orchestra's music faltered, notes wobbling in the air before the holograms flickered uncertainly. Mira's chest tightened. She hadn't meant to start this. She hadn't meant to make them fight. But it was happening, and she could not stop it. Beside her, Alexander remained calm. His hand rested lightly on the table, his face unreadable. His gaze sweeping across the chaos as though watching the pieces of a game move exactly where he wanted them. Finally, one of the wealthiest lords slammed his goblet down, red wine spilling across the silver tablecloth like blood. This is absurd, he barked. His jeweled rings glimmered as he pointed a finger directly at Mira. She is no one, nothing, yet you allow her words to poison this hall. She should not even be here. The nobles quieted, their eyes snapping back to the center of the storm. The man's voice dripped with venom. She is not one of us, he spat. She has no education, no breeding, no station. And you, he turned his fury toward Alexander. You insult us by bringing her among us. What game are you playing, Vaynar? Mira's breath caught. The room seemed to tilt, the pressure of 100 stairs returning to crush her. But before she could falter, Alexander rose. His movement was slow, deliberate. When he stood, the murmurs fell silent, as though the air itself had bent to his will. He did not raise his voice. He did not match the noble's anger. Instead, his words came quiet, sharp and calm. You fear her, Alexander said. The noble's face reddened. I fear nothing. You do. Alexander's eyes locked onto him like iron. You fear her because she speaks what you will not. Because she has no chains of wealth to bind her tongue. Because she reminds you that wisdom is not owned by the guild, nor purchased with credits, nor inherited by bloodlines. His voice grew harder, carrying across the hall. You laugh at her because you cannot silence her. You mock her because you know her words cut deeper than yours. And you hate her. Because she is proof that your power does not make you greater. The hall was utterly still. The noble's mouth opened, then closed. His fury choked into silence. Alexander's gaze swept across the room, meeting every pair of eyes. You sit in halls of crystal, drunk on your own importance. But tonight a servant has unsettled you. Ask yourselves why. Ask yourselves what it means when truth spoken from the lowest seat shakes the highest table. The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was heavy, dangerous. Mira stared at Alexander, her pulse racing. She had never heard him speak like this. Not in the quiet mornings, not in the long afternoons when she worked in his home. Always he was reserved, calm, distant. But now, in this hall of power, his voice carried the weight of a man who had planned every word. It struck her then. This was no accident. He had brought her here with purpose. But what purpose? To protect her? To test her? To use her? She couldn't tell. Commander Halric leaned back in his chair, his smile faint but his eyes sharp, glittering like a blade half hidden in shadow. He did not stop Alexander. He did not silence the hall. He simply watched, amused or perhaps calculating. Finally Halric spoke. His voice cut through the air like steel sliding from a... Shaith, enough. The nobles fell silent instantly. Commander's gaze moved slowly from Alexander to Mira. He studied her with an intensity that made her spine stiffen. Then he spoke words that chilled the hall. Perhaps the housekeeper is right. Gasps, a few choked laughs, disbelief. Halric's lips curved into a half-smile. Perhaps the guild has grown deaf. Perhaps we have forgotten the voices beyond these walls. He raised his glass again, though this time his tone carried a dangerous edge. If so, then perhaps it is time we remembered. The hall erupted into chaos. Some shouted in anger, others in agreement. Nobles argued, pointing fingers, their polished masks cracking into raw emotion. The grand dinner had unraveled into something far greater, and Mira sat in the middle of it all, her hands trembling, her heart pounding. She had not meant to cause this storm, but she could not deny it. The shift had come, she had changed something in that room, and though she could not yet see its shape, she knew one thing for certain. The night was no longer in the guild's control. The grand hall was no longer a dinner, it had become a battlefield. Voices clashed like steel, the air vibrating with anger, fear and pride. The scent of roasted meat and fine wine had turned bitter, drowned out by the stench of panic in the nobles' voices. Mira sat frozen at the center, her hands resting in her lap, her knuckles pale. She had said so little, yet her presence had lit a fire no one could smother. Alexander's calm gaze rested on her, but even his stillness couldn't quiet the storm around them. And then, the massive doors at the far end of the hall burst open with a violent clang, every voice silenced. Heads turned sharply. A guild officer, his uniform dark and gleaming with silver trim, rushed into the room. His boots echoed across the marble floor as he strode straight to Commander Halric. His chest heaved with urgency, his voice sharp, unsteady. "Commander, forgive the intrusion, but the message could not wait." The commander rose slowly. The hall seemed to shrink under his towering presence. "Speak." The officer glanced at the gathered nobles, then swallowed hard. "The outer trade route has been struck. 3 convoys destroyed. Survivors report pirate ships of unknown design, fast, coordinated, ruthless." Gasps rippled through the hall. Nobles exchanged horrified looks. Impossible. "The guild patrols that route. Pirates do not have that kind of strength." The officer continued, his voice tight. "These are not common raiders. Their technology surpasses ours in speed and firepower, and they vanish before our fleets arrive. The council is in chaos, Commander. They demand immediate action." The hall buzzed with fear. Merchants whispered about losses. Lords muttered about retaliation. Some voices demanded war, others withdrawal. Halric lifted his hand. And silence fell once more. He turned not to his officers, not to his council, but to Mira. Her stomach dropped as his piercing eyes locked onto her. "You," Halric said, his tone cold but deliberate. "You spoke of unrest beyond our walls. You spoke of listening to voices ignored. Tell me, what would you do with this threat?" The entire hall froze. Nobles stared at her with open shock. Some laughed nervously, others sneered. A housekeeper. "This is madness. Has the commander lost his mind?" Mira's throat tightened. Her palms were slick with sweat. She had not been trained for this. She was not a commander, not a strategist. She cleaned halls, polished tables, folded clothes. She did not command fleets or negotiate treaties, and yet, all eyes were on her. She glanced at Alexander. His calm gaze met hers, steady and sure, as if urging her forward. "This is why I brought you." His silence spoke louder than words. Mira drew a slow breath and she spoke. "Your fleets fail," she said softly, but her voice carried. "Not because they are weak, but because they are blind." The room stirred. "The pirates know the routes better than your maps. They know the hidden lanes, the debris fields, the nebula currents where sensors fail. They live where you only trade. They hide where your guild has never set foot." Her words grew stronger, steadier. You send patrols with shining ships and trained officers, but they are strangers in those skies. The workers, the settlers, the miners, the traders, the people you ignore, they know those routes better than anyone. They know the dangers. They know the hiding places. And if you want to stop these raids, you need them. Gasps, murmurs, outrage. Use peasants to defend us? One noble spat. She's suggesting treason. They cannot be trusted with weapons. Mira did not falter. She rose to her feet, her voice cutting through their protests like a blade. Then trust no one and lose everything, because those pirates are already stronger than you believe. If you do not use the knowledge of the people who walk those paths every day, your fleets will keep arriving too late. And one day they will not arrive at all. Her eyes swept across the hall, landing last on Halric. The guild must stand with the people, not above them, or the pirates will burn both the workers and your precious ships alike. Silence. The nobles stared at her, some with fury, some with awe. Alexander's lips curved into the faintest smile. The great hall had never felt so fragile. It was a place built on polished marble, golden chandeliers, and unshakable pride. Yet tonight it trembled. The whispers of nobles cut through the air like knives, their outrage clashing against one another. Mira sat stiffly, her pulse still racing from the words she had spoken. She had not meant to defy them, not meant to challenge centuries of power, but she had. And she could feel the weight of it pressing down. Heavier than the jeweled crown one noble woman wore. Heavier than the commander's medals that gleamed under the light. She had been seen, heard, and now judged. Some nobles looked at her with raw anger, others with disbelief, and a few with something stranger, curiosity. One merchant prince leaned close to his companion, whispering, "She thinks like a strategist. Who taught her?" Another lord sneered openly. "This is dangerous. If workers think they can lead, the guild will unravel." The words tangled together. A storm that threatened to break over her head. But then Alexander stood. He had been quiet through the chaos, his calm presence like a shadow at her side. Now as he rose, the room stilled again. His voice carried, quiet but commanding. "You asked what game I was playing." His eyes swept across the nobles, then landed on the man who had shouted at Mira earlier. "You thought I brought her here to mock you or to shame you, but you are wrong." He turned, his gaze falling on Mira. She felt her breath catch as he spoke again. "I brought her here because she sees what you cannot." Gasps echoed through the room. Alexander's face was calm, but his words were sharp. "You call yourselves leaders, but you live in towers so high you no longer see the ground. You command fleets you do not sail. You tax colonies you have never visited. You call yourselves rulers of men, but you do not know them. She does." The silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of one noble's hand tightening on his goblet until the glass cracked. "She's a housekeeper," someone hissed. Alexander's gaze hardened. "And yet she has shown more vision in one night than many of you in a lifetime." Mira's heart pounded. His words struck her deeply, but also frightened her. Was this truly why he brought her? To place her against these giants? Commander Halric rose then, slowly, deliberately. His movements drew every eye. He regarded Mira with that same sharp gaze, a blade hidden behind his faint smile. He raised his glass, not to Alexander, not to the nobles, but to her. "To truth," he said again. The word echoed. Some nobles raised their glasses reluctantly. Others refused, their faces tight with anger. But a few followed willingly, eyes fixed on Mira as though she were no longer invisible. For the first time in her life, people who ruled fleets and worlds looked at her as if she mattered. The orchestra struck hesitant notes again, trying to restore the evening. Servants moved nervously, refilling glasses, replacing dishes left untouched. But the room did not return to its old rhythm. Something had broken. Something had shifted. Mira could feel it, like a current beneath calm waters. She leaned toward Alexander, her voice low so only he could hear. "Why me?" His eyes softened slightly, though his smile never reached his lips. "Because truth spoken from my mouth would be dismissed as arrogance. Truth spoken from yours cannot be ignored. They did not see you coming, Mira. That is your strength." She stared at him, the weight of his words pressing into her chest. She wanted to argue, to deny it, but the memory of the nobles' shocked silence lingered. She had spoken and they had listened, even if only to mock. But they had listened. The dinner slowly wound down, though no one remembered the food or the speeches. All they remembered was her. As the guests left in clusters, their voices hushed but fierce, Mira caught fragments. She must never be allowed near the council. Or perhaps she belongs there, dangerous but brilliant. Some glanced at her with fury, others with calculation, as though already considering alliances or threats. For the first time, Mira realized she was no longer invisible, and that frightened her more than anything. When the hall finally emptied, Commander Halric approached. The vast room seemed too quiet without the noise of nobles, the echo of his boots filling the space. He stopped before her, studying her with that unreadable gaze. Then he inclined his head, not deeply but enough to stun her. "You are reckless," he said. "But sometimes recklessness is what shakes the foundations of power." Mira swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to insult you." Halric's lips curved into a half-smile. "You did more than insult me. You challenged me. Few dare. Fewer still survive it. Remember this, girl." His tone grew colder, sharper. "You have their attention now. Some will admire you. Some will fear you. Most will want to break you. Be ready." And with that he turned and left, his cloak sweeping behind him like a shadow that swallowed the light. Mira stood frozen, his words echoing in her mind. She turned to Alexander, her voice a whisper. "What have you done to me?" Alexander's gaze lingered on her, calm as ever, but his words carried the weight of inevitability. "I have shown them who you are, and who you can become." Mira felt a chill run through her veins. She had walked into the hall as a servant, unseen and unimportant. She was leaving it as something else entirely, something she did not yet understand. But one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The night outside the guild's grand tower was quiet, but Mira could not hear it. Her mind buzzed with voices that would not fade: the laughter, the anger, the disbelief, and the sharp weight of Commander Halric's warning. She followed Alexander through the polished corridors, her steps echoing in the emptiness. The guild's banners hung heavy on the walls, their golden crests gleaming under the glow of hovering lanterns. Every step felt heavier than the last. When they finally stepped into the cool night air, Mira exhaled as though she had been holding her breath for hours. The sky above was crowded with ships, their thrusters glowing against the stars. This city never slept. It never even blinked. She turned to Alexander, her voice breaking the silence. "Why me? Out of all the people you could have chosen. Why me?" Alexander paused, his eyes reflecting the neon lights of the city. "Because truth needs an unexpected voice. Power does not fear power, Mira. It fears the unknown. And tonight you became that unknown." Mira shook her head. "You've made them hate me." "You're wrong," Alexander replied calmly. "I've made them see you." They entered his sky car, its doors sliding open with a whisper. The sleek machine lifted into the air, merging into the river of lights above the city. Mira sat silently, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as the ground dropped away. For the first time since the dinner, she allowed herself to breathe. But even as the city stretched out beneath her, she could not shake the memory of the noble's eyes, piercing, judging, calculating. She whispered almost to herself, "They'll never forgive me." Alexander's voice was steady. "Forgiveness is useless. Fear is stronger. Respect is stronger still. Tonight you planted both." Far away in the upper spires of the guild's headquarters, another gathering was taking place. The nobles who had stormed out of the dinner now crowded into a secret chamber lit only by pale blue holoscreens. Their voices were hushed, but their fury was sharp. "She humiliated us." "She humiliated you, perhaps." I saw a spark in her words. "She is dangerous. She is nothing, a servant pretending at wisdom." Then why did the commander listen to her? The voices clashed, until one old noble leaned forward, his face a shadow under the blue light. "Whether you believe her or not, understand this. The people will hear of it. Whispers will spread." A servant stood in the guild's golden hall and spoke truth, while lords bickered. "That story will travel faster than any fleet, and if it does," his voice dropped lower, "then our world changes." The chamber fell silent. Back in Alexander's sky car, Mira finally turned to him with sharper eyes. "You planned this." Alexander did not deny it. "Yes, you knew what would happen. I knew something would happen. The rest," he allowed the faintest smile, "was up to you." Mira's heart twisted. Anger mixed with confusion. "You used me." "I revealed you," Alexander corrected. His gaze met hers unflinching. "Tell me, before tonight, who knew your name? Who looked at you? Who listened when you spoke?" She said nothing because she knew the answer. "No one," Alexander continued. "Now the most powerful people in the guild cannot forget you. That cannot be undone." Mira turned back to the window, watching the endless spires glide past. She hated that he was right, and yet beneath her fear something stirred. A spark, a strange, dangerous spark. Later that night, as she returned to her small quarters in Alexander's estate, Mira lay awake staring at the ceiling. She thought of the commander's words. "Most will want to break you." She thought of Alexander's calm certainty. "They cannot ignore you now." And she thought of her own voice in that golden hall, strong, steady, undeniable. She had spoken once and the world had shifted. But was that power hers? Or had it always belonged to Alexander, guiding her from the shadows? Beyond the city, out in the cold void of space, the pirates moved again. In hidden bases carved into asteroid fields, they prepared their fleets. Their ships, sleek and fast, bristled with weapons not seen in guild arsenals. At the center of their command, a figure watched the holoscreens with a smile. News had already reached them, rumors of a servant who dared to challenge the guild. "Interesting," the pirate leader murmured. His voice was low, his grin sharp. "The guild bleeds from within.